Hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to do a simple backpack style inventory. If you've seen any of my devlogs, you'll know the inventory style I mean. Also, games like Roki have a backpack style inventory. It's a wonderful puzzle adventure game that I highly recommend. I enjoyed that very much. Life is Strange also has this style of simple inventory, which just shows you a handful of objects that you've collected in the game, items that you've collected. The old titles, the Dizzy titles, come to mind as well, if any of you are old enough to remember those. And it's a platform puzzle game where Dizzy collects objects in the game that he can use to solve puzzles. This is a two-part tutorial. Part one is the video you're watching now. And in part one, we're going to set up our objects, we're going to set up our events. And by the end of part one, you will have a fully functioning inventory. Part two, I'm mostly going to focus on visual improvements to the inventory. We're going to have a backpack icon that opens and closes, and we're going to have a dynamic background for our collected objects that expands to be as big as it needs to be based on how many objects you've collected. Also in part two, I'll show you how to delete items from your inventory as well. We're going to be starting with a completely empty GDevelop project. You don't need to have anything set up in advance, just a blank project with an empty scene. The only thing you do need is some objects to collect. So you need some graphics. So in my case, I've got 5 collectibles. They're just PNGs. They're 150 by 150 pixels. If you want to follow along with me exactly, that's the size I'm using. But you could have your collectibles be all sorts of different sizes. You could have a very small collectible like a coin, and you could also have a large collectible like, I don't know, a tree or something. But for me, I'm going to keep all mine the same size, and we're going to put them all in the same object. For the inventory icons, they do need to be the same size as each other. So you don't want some of them to be small, some of them to be big. They all need to be the same size. And again, if you're following along with me exactly, my icons are 93 by 93 pixels. The first thing we're going to do is set up our collectibles. So go ahead and add a new object, a sprite object, and I'm going to call it collectibles. And in my case, I'm going to put all 5 collectibles in the same object just to keep the tutorial nice and easy. But in your game, you might want your collectibles as separate objects. It's entirely up to you. Right, let's go ahead and add the dinosaur. I'm going to name the animation just so it's easy in the events to recognize which is which, but you could refer to the animation number in your events instead. Doesn't really matter for the collectibles. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward through the next 4. Then we drag our collectibles onto the scene. I'm going to drag 5 copies of our dinosaur here onto the scene, and then I'm going to change the animation. So the dinosaur is animation 0, so I want animation 1 for the heart, 2 for the mug, 3 for the plant, and 4 for the star. Now we're going to create our inventory items. So go ahead and create a new object, another sprite object, and I'm going to call this inventory items. Go ahead and add an animation. We're going to add the dinosaur first and give it a name, give the animation a name. Now, in this case, for this inventory items object, the animation name is important because we're going to be doing some sort of dynamic things with that later on. So make sure you name these ones. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through the other 4. Let's set up some scene variables next. So up here and edit scene variables. And by the way, you can get here quicker by pressing V. So add a variable, and we're going to call this collected items, and it's going to be a structure variable. This is going to be used to keep track of what collectibles we've collected in our game. We need a child variable for every collectible. So in our case here today, we've got 5 items that we can collect. They're all going to be Boolean, which means true or false, and they all start false at the beginning of the game because we haven't collected anything yet, but we're going to change them to true in our events later. Now, the child names are very important. They need to match your inventory items animation names. If there are any differences in spelling or name, then the system won't work properly. So I'll just fast forward and name all these. The next variable is going to be called x position. And just a note, this is a new variable. It's not another child of this one. And it's going to be number. And now the starting value of this is going to be 150. This will make sense a little bit later when I talk about the events. But broadly speaking, we're going to use this number to lay out our inventory icons. And lastly, we want another Boolean called isOpen. And I'm going to use this variable to track whether our inventory is open or not. And that, again, that will make sense in a minute when we look at the events. And that also starts as false because at the beginning of the game, your inventory is closed. Click apply to that. We want to be able to collect these objects by clicking on them with a mouse. And when we click on them, that variable, the collected items for the item, gets changed to true when we do so. So let's set that up in the events. So we create our first event, and the first condition, we're going to have mouse button released. We're going to use the left button. The second condition is going to check that our cursor is touching the object, so collectibles. But our collectibles, remember, has all our items inside it, so we need to tell this event which particular instance we want to target. So we do that by doing an animation check. So animation by name for collectibles equals dinosaur. So it will target the one that's set to the dinosaur animation and not the other 4 here. And when these things are true, we want to change our variable, our collected items variable, to say that we've collected the dinosaur. So let's have a look. Let's change that. We want a Boolean of a scene variable. Here we go. Collected items dot dinosaur, and the dot dinosaur is the child of this scene structure variable. And we want to change it to true because it's false to begin with. It's going to change to true here when we do these things. And lastly, we want to delete the item so you can't collect it twice. And it knows which one to delete because we've set it here. We've checked for the animation. So if I run it now and I try to collect the heart, the star, the plant by clicking on them, that won't work. But clicking on the dinosaur will work. So it knows which instance I'm talking about because of this. And in your game, you might have your collectibles as loads of different separate objects, so you won't have to worry about this animation check. You can just target your particular object because it will be a unique object. Anyway, I'm going to do the other 4 items in the same way. I'm going to just fast forward through those. Now, if we preview this, we should be able to collect all 5 of our items. So dinosaur, heart, mug, plant, star. A way that we can test whether the collected items variable is being updated when we collect our items is by running a preview and debugger. So if we click refresh here and we go down to scene variables, we've got our structure variable here, and all the children are set to false. Now, if we collect some things, let's say we collect the dinosaur and the star and click refresh, there you go, dinosaur updates to true and so does star. And let's just test the rest. Make sure here, all 5 items I've collected now, and yep, that these variables are all being set to true, so everything's working properly. Let's just have a little tidy up of our events. We'll put all our collectible events inside a group. I'm just shift clicking them here to select them all, and then right clicking, replace, move events into a group. And we'll just call this collectibles. There we go. We're going to do the events for the inventory itself now. So go ahead and create a new event. And the first thing we're going to do is check for a key press. I'm going to use the space bar, but you can use whatever button you like. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to check the value of our isOpen variable. And we're going to check that it's false. So in other words, if the inventory is closed at the moment, then we can open it. Our next event is going to be a for each child, and it needs to be a sub-event of this one, so we just move it in there. It's important that it's a sub-event of this one because we don't want this block to run. This block is going to check what items we've got in our inventory, and we don't need that to happen unless the inventory is being opened by somebody. So for each child in collected items, store the child in variable, we'll just give it the name item. So it's going to go through each child in our structure variable collected items, and it's going to capture the true or false value in a variable called item. And the child name, we're going to just give it item name, and we'll be using that information as well. That's important because remember, our item names match our animation, so we're going to be using this to set our animations. Now, the only condition for this is we're going to check the value of that Boolean variable called item. So, and we're going to check that it's true. So it's going to go through each child variable of collected items. It's going to capture the value of each one of them in this temporary sort of variable called item. I say temporary because we haven't declared a variable called item in our scene variables. We're creating it here in the events. So we're capturing true or false. And then I'm going to test here for any that are true. So if dinosaur is true and star is true, they will ring true with this event, and then we can do things to them here. Anything we haven't collected will have a value of false, so it won't be included here. It won't run for those. Our first action in this event is going to be to create the inventory items. So, well, inventory item rather. So we choose that. The X position is going to use the number from our X position variable that we set up earlier. And we are going to be adding to this number. That's why I'm using a variable, because we're going to be adding to this to position items spaced out rather than all in the same place. For Y position, we're just going to use 50 pixels. So it's 50 pixels from the top of the screen, and in this case, 150 pixels from the left of the screen, and just leave it at base layer and OK that. We can test this, although it's going to show us the dinosaur no matter what we collect. Let's collect the mug and press space. We get the dinosaur because we haven't finished yet, but it's 150 pixels from the left and 50 from the top, so it's appearing in the right place. We're going to use the child names now, this item name, to set our animation. So let's do that. Animation by name of our inventory items equals, and we're going to use an expression, simple expression here, variable string item name. So we're setting our animation using our item name, and remember our item name is the child variable name as it goes through. So it's going to look at each child and capture each child's name here, and we're going to use that to set the animation. And that's why it was important that the child names and the animation names are exactly the same, because we're using them in this loop. We can test whether this is working by running a preview. So let's collect anything except for the dinosaur. So let's just collect the mug and press space. And yep, the mug is appearing as it should and not the dinosaur. Next thing we want to do is update the value of our x position variable. We're going to add to it. So I want to change our number variable, scene variable, x position, and we want to add 100 to it. So what this will create, the loop this will create, is when the first inventory item is created at x position, which is 150 to start with, so about here from the left. And then we add 100 to it, which increases it to 250 for the next item to be placed. So if we preview this, we collect the heart and the plant and press space, you can see they get spaced out neatly. It creates one at 150. It adds 100 to it for 250 for the next one. So they end up in a nice neat row with these gaps in between. If you want your gaps to be bigger, just increase this number. And by the way, don't worry that they're repeating. We're going to fix that next. Now we're going to create an event that sets the isOpen boolean to true when our inventory is open and when there's something in the inventory. So we're going to create a new event, and it is a separate event, this. It's not a sub-event of this. So, and the condition we're going to use, the number of object instances on the scene, and we're going to check for inventory items. We're going to do greater or equal to 1. So in other words, when you've got at least one item in your inventory and it's created that object in the scene, we want to change the boolean, the scene boolean, isOpen, to true. And by the way, this variable, the point of this variable, will become clearer when we create our close inventory event. You might be wondering at the moment, this isn't really doing anything. Well, it isn't yet, but it will be. It will be important in a minute. And we're going to use a trigger once here as well, because we don't need this to be set to true over and over and over again the whole time you're looking at your inventory. We just need it to happen once. So you might be wondering, why don't we include it as part of this block? Because we've pressed a button, we've pressed space, and our items are being put on the screen. Why don't we set it to true there? Well, similar reason I just talked about with the trigger once, is that every time we've got an item, every time the child is true and an item is created, this gets set to true each time. And again, it doesn't really matter that it gets set to true multiple times. It's not going to break anything, but you don't need it to be set to true over and over and over again. So it's just sort of tidier, really, to have things separate like this and only have things running that need to run. Even something like a variable change, it's not going to, it's not going to crush your frame rate or anything if this is part of this block. But in bigger projects, having things running all the time that you don't need to run all the time is obviously a bit, problematic in larger projects. But while I'm talking about why this is where it is, you might be thinking, why not include it as part of this? Well, this is a problem too, because if I press space and this is set to false, our inventory open will be set to true, even if we've got no items. So, and this will, as I say, this will become the point of this whole isOpen variable will become much clearer in a moment. Our final event is going to be the one that closes the inventory, and the purpose of this variable will become clear. So we create another event, not a sub-event, and we're going to look for a key press. I'm just going to use X. This is the button we're going to use to close our inventory. And we are going to look at what the value of this variable is. So I'm going to copy paste it, but I'm going to change it to true. So if the inventory is open, we can close it. If the inventory is not open, we can open it. So that's the point of this Boolean flicking backwards and forwards. What we want to do when we press X to close our inventory is we want to delete all of our inventory items, so that we're not targeting any individual instance anymore. We're just deleting the whole lot. And we want to change a couple of variables here. Again, I'm going to copy paste. We're going to change our X position variable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it back to 150, which, if you remember when we set our variables up, is the default value. What that means is when we close our inventory and it deletes all these icons and we open it again, the position of the first inventory icon will be back to 150. So it won't sort of be halfway across the screen if we don't reset it, because it'll have a number that's been added to. And the final action of our final event is we're going to set our Boolean, oh my bad, Boolean spelling again, is open back to false. So there we go. So now you can hopefully see now what the purpose of this is. This gets set to false when we close our inventory so that we can open it again, and vice versa. It's just to prevent both things from happening, being possible at the same time. And if we run our inventory now, here we go, we'll collect the dinosaur, the plant, and the star. We press space, you can see there are no duplicates now. We've taken care of that. Even if I press space multiple times, we're not creating multiple instances here. And then if I press X, they get deleted. Space and X. So there we go. And we just test it again. We'll test it fully. We'll collect all 5. And there we go, we've got all 5. So we have a working inventory with an open and close. And yeah, cool. It's quite a relief when you get to the end of a tutorial and it all works properly.